Hello, I'm Flora speaking out again, as usual, and thank you so much for joining me. Yes, those of you who've listened to me for 4 months now, some of you may be thinking, Flora's always talking about how awful the times were when time she was born and when she was young. So many things lacking. No Medicare, no Medicaid, no welfare, no Social Security, no antibiotics, civil rights ignored or abused, white supremacy, all kinds of things untended to at the time I was young. Some of you may be wondering, was there nothing back then that was really good that you wish was with us now? Fair question. Yes, there were quite a number of things, and I'll be talking about them from time to time. The one in my mind, particularly now, tonight, is back in my youth, the early 40s, there was such deep respect for science research, scientific methodology. You might say back, and I was born, as you know, in 1928, this was in some ways the morning of science. Wonderful things were opening up after centuries and centuries of superstition, like flat Earth or the sun going around the Earth rather than the other way. Witch burnings and hangings, plagues, so many swore were caused by Jews or heretics. We were just coming out of those centuries. In fact, 60 years, just 60 years before my birth, it's hard to believe, the germ theory was still being disputed. People were refusing to look through microscopes, knowing they wouldn't see anything. 60 years before my birth, antiseptics, the necessity of washing your hands before you operated on someone or delivered a baby, that was still being disputed. Well, 30 years before my birth, things were improving somewhat. There were the first experiments with X-ray, electricity. Back in the early 1900s, they were just beginning electricity for homes. The telephone was being experimented with, all this just 30 years before. Also around that time, the scientific discoveries that malaria and yellow fever were caused by mosquitoes, not by contagion. These were big beginnings. And then around the time of my birth, 1928, vitamins were just being valued, investigated, promoted. Also, around the time of my birth, they were talking about new kinds of blood pressure. Vaccinations were beginning to open up. And science was an eagerly sought open door. Young people were flooding into science fearlessly. Science research funding was a priority. There was no question, as far as I can remember, in the 1940s, when I really began noticing these things, no question of politicizing science or ideology claiming power over science the way it had for so many centuries. I remember my classes in high school and college in science, chemistry, and I didn't get good grades, but I learned to value it, biology, astronomy, geology, And in every one of those classes back there in the 40s, we students were being given powerful guidelines about how to approach science, what the science methodology was. First of all, a fearless, open mind. Questions over and over. Question everything. Don't be afraid to question everything and anything. Then tests. Evidence. Then test again, and test again, and test again, and read the evidence. Evidence. Open discussion with other researchers and scientists. The door was open. To be sure, there was a very long way to go. There still wasn't much questioning about environmental health, climate change, weather reporting. Yeah, we didn't have satellites then. Weather reporting was almost totally dependent on barometric pressure reported by boats at sea or from various parts around the country. A long way to go medically. Antibiotics back in 1940 weren't used yet, barely begun. Cancer was usually a death sentence, almost always. You were considered old by the time you were 60. Much to learn, and in the wonderful decades following the 40s, enormous steps forward. Huge, unbelievable, miraculous changes in all these areas. And now, in the 2025, what's happening to our fearless, open-minded, questioning science? It's again, as it was for so many centuries, beginning to fall under the power of ideology and politics. For example, back last week, the researchers and workers at NASA, hundreds of them, signed a letter protesting the enormous cutbacks and firings going on. They were protesting for the sake of safety in NASA's work. Climate report, because their major climate research had been totally cut out. And that had been going on for 25 years. One of the main ways that the federal government and the rest of us learned about climate change. But no, that can't continue, can it? Trump has told us it's a hoax. Never mind facts, never mind evidence. It's a hoax because he says so. And the cowards who follow him, knowing better, are bowing down before power. People are frightened. Let me read you a short paragraph describing the fear in NASA, of all places. The fearless astronaut breeding ground. They're frightened. One of the research analysts said, "We're scared of retribution." She said, in this quote, "Members are now going into the bathrooms to talk to each other. And they first look under the stalls to make sure no one else is there before we talk together." Fearlessness in research, it's on the chopping block. Have you seen what's happened with the EPA? Thousands fired. It's being almost totally defunded. Or how about the Food and Drug Administration? FDA. Recently, 3,500 workers and researchers have been fired. Robert Kennedy Jr. fired his whole vaccine panel when he entered that position and put his ideologues in their place who don't care about evidence and fact. Recently in the FDA, hundreds signed a protest. Every one of them is fired. And this is the reason, quote unquote, they were unlawfully undermining the Trump agenda. Our medications are being reduced because of the Trump agenda. Air pollution. Trump and the Senate have recently legislated against California's strict laws against greenhouse gases, and the Supreme Court is backing them up. Never mind evidence, proven fact. Look at the universities now and the medical centers who are being totally defunded of their research grants from the government. They're working on diseases like cancer, paralysis, diseases that we were just on the brink of maybe being able to overcome in this generation. We're being set back. Anything now in the science, whether weather, medicine, drugs, air pollution, NASA, climate control, weather reporting, thousands fired there too. The government is saying, either you fit the Trump agenda or we are coming after you. In other words, trying to push us back 500 years, where it was still a dangerous thing to say the earth goes around the sun. And any scientist who said that was clapped in prison if they could catch him. All right, those of you who are hiding in the bathrooms, looking first under the stalls, you scientists, researchers, talking now in fear of your reputation and your jobs. I urge you, when you sign your letters of protest, to sign them with a large hand, the way, who was it who signed the Declaration of Independence with as large swoops of his pen as he possibly could so his name would not be overlooked. Sign that way. If you are fired, don't sneak off quietly into the night. Stand on your feet. Go public. Speak out loud. Now, how about the rest of us who are maybe not in danger of being fired or our reputations destroyed? What you and I try to do in our own ways, walk in the streets, telephone, write letters. What word for us? I found the exact word from the father of our present health secretary, Robert Kennedy Jr. I found a wonderful quote from his wonderful father that I would like to read to you. And to read it gives me hope as I try to speak out in my own small way, and as I'm sure each of you are doing in your own way as best you can. Listen to what the first Robert Kennedy has to say to us. Each time a person stands for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, each time these persons send out a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring. Those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Let's never stop speaking out, and let's never give up hope. Thank you for being with me tonight. I'll be with you next week.